58 years ago, a 24-year-old woman named Cecilia Voss disappeared from a county road outside Clanton, Mississippi, leaving behind a voter registration ledger, a canvas shoulder bag, and a pair of canvas shoes sitting neatly at the edge of the road, as though she had simply decided, in the middle of the night, to walk away from her own life without them. Authorities concluded she had left voluntarily. They said there was no evidence of foul play. They said this at a press conference that lasted 11 minutes, and then they moved on, because it was 1966, and Cecilia Voss was a 24-year-old black woman from Chicago who had come to Chilton County to help register voters. And the machinery of justice in Chilton County in 1966 was not built to ask hard questions about what happened to people like her. Her family did not believe she had left voluntarily. They had never, in 58 years, believed it for a single moment. Then, in the fall of 2023, a vial of blood from that road shoulder, typed as a rare variant and kept in a state archive for 57 years, became the key that unlocked a name. The name pointed to a man who was still living. What happened next began not in a courtroom, but in a nursing home room in Meridian, where a camera was running and an 87-year-old man had decided he had lived with the truth long enough. But to understand what he said on that tape, you have to go back to the summer of 1966 and to who Cecilia Voss was when she was doing the work that cost her everything. The summer of 1966 was the summer after Selma and the Edmund Pettus Bridge. After the Voting Rights Act had been signed into law by President Johnson and the machinery of its enforcement had begun, slowly, painfully, against enormous resistance, to move through the counties of the Deep South, where the gap between what the law now said and what the county courthouse actually permitted was still measured in violence and intimidation. Organizations across the country were sending volunteers south that summer. Young people trained in nonviolent canvassing who would go door to door in rural counties and explain to black residents what their rights now were and how to exercise them. And who understood before they went that exercising those rights in Chilton County, Mississippi, in 1966, was still an act of personal courage of the highest order. Cecilia Voss had been one of those volunteers. She had grown up in the Bronzeville neighborhood of Chicago, the daughter of a Pullman porter and a schoolteacher. She had graduated from Roosevelt University in 1964 with a degree in political science and had spent the following 2 years organizing community voter registration drives on the South Side before accepting a placement with a civil rights organization that was sending trained workers into rural Mississippi for the summer of 1966. She was not unaware of the risks. She had spoken about them with her mother, Vivian Voss, before she went. She had told Vivian that the work had to be done by someone and that she was as capable of doing it as anyone. She had been in Chilton County for 6 weeks when she disappeared. She was methodical and unhurried in her work, the way her mother had taught her to be. She kept a pocket notebook, the small, spiral-bound kind sold at the 5 and dime, in which she recorded the name and address of every household she visited, the date, the response, and a brief note about whether a follow-up would be useful. She had filled 2 notebooks already by mid-June. She had started a third. She carried it in the front pocket of her canvas shoulder bag, alongside her identification and the organization's contact cards, and a stub of pencil she sharpened with a pocket knife her father had given her when she left. On the evening of June 14, 1966, she had been walking back from a canvassing visit to a household 3 miles outside Clanton when the night came for her on that county road. The visiting family had watched her walk away from their porch in the long summer dusk. She had waved once at the door. She had not turned back. They never saw her again. And for 58 years, neither did anyone else who loved her. The family of the household she had visited, a man named Elijah Pruitt and his wife, Maud, heard nothing unusual from the road that night. They had gone inside. By the time anyone thought to look, it was past dark. On the morning of June 15th, a passing motorist noticed the canvas shoes at the road's edge and the shoulder bag a few feet further. Its contents partially spilled into the gravel. He flagged down a county sheriff's deputy at 7:40 a.m. The deputy parked, examined the scene, collected the bag and its contents, and noted a dark stain on the road shoulder that the state crime laboratory would later type as human blood, group AB negative, present in fewer than 1% of the population. The shoes, the bag, the blood. The deputy called his sergeant. The sergeant called the county sheriff. The county sheriff was a man named Truman Polk, 61 years old, who had held the position of Chilton County Sheriff since 1954, and who was known, in the specific vocabulary of Chilton County in 1966, as a man who kept things orderly. The investigation he authorized was cursory by design. A canvass of the road yielded no additional physical evidence. No witness came forward publicly. The voter registration organization that had placed Cecilia in the county was contacted and told there was no evidence of foul play and that their volunteer had likely left the area of her own accord. The organization's director, a man named Arthur Cole, drove to Clanton himself and was told the same thing, more firmly, by Polk in person. Cole did not believe it. He had known Cecilia. He had trained her. He called the FBI field office in Jackson and was told the case did not meet the threshold for federal involvement at this time. The case file documented 3 persons of interest, all of them canvassed and dismissed within a week. One name appeared in the file with a notation that would not be understood for 58 years, T. Polk, Jr., present in area per witness statement 614, no further action taken. The investigator who wrote that line was a junior deputy. He had noted what he had heard from a witness. He had not followed it further because the witness had been reluctant to name the person, and because the person's last name was the same as the county sheriff's, and because in Chilton County in 1966, a junior deputy understood the limits of what that notation would permit him to do. T. Polk Jr. was Truman Polk's son. He was 26 years old in June 1966. He worked the front desk at his father's office 2 days a week and drove a county-registered vehicle. He had been seen on the county road outside Clanton on the evening of June 14, 1966, by a witness who had told a deputy and then, when asked to make a formal statement, had declined. The notebook Cecilia had been carrying, the third one, the one she had started the previous week, was never recovered. Her identification card was in the bag. Her contact cards were in the bag. The notebook was not. Vivian Voss buried an empty coffin in Chicago in the spring of 1967. After the state of Mississippi formally listed Cecilia as a missing person, and the Chilton County Sheriff's Office closed its active investigation. She put Cecilia's name on the stone. She put the dates. She left the rest of the stone blank because she didn't know what else to say, and because she had promised herself she would not write anything on it that wasn't true. She kept that promise for the rest of her life. By 1975, 9 years had passed. The organization that had placed Cecilia in Chilton County had published an internal memorial booklet in 1968, listing her alongside 11 other civil rights workers who had disappeared or been killed in the South during the movement years. And the booklet had circulated within activist and academic communities, without ever reaching the kind of mainstream recognition that might have kept pressure on the investigation. Arthur Cole had submitted a formal request to the Justice Department's Civil Rights Division in 1972, asking that the case be reviewed under federal civil rights statutes. The request was acknowledged and then absorbed into a backlog from which it did not resurface for years. Vivian Voss wrote to the Mississippi Attorney General's office in 1971, 1974, 1979, and 1983. The 1983 letter was the one she had typed herself at the kitchen table in Bronzeville, 4 pages, single-spaced, with the names of the witnesses she had gathered through her own inquiry over 17 years. People who had told her things they would not tell the Chilton County Sheriff's Office, because Truman Polk had still been sheriff until 1978, when he retired, and because his son Thomas had gone into private business in Meridian, and had, by most accounts, done adequately well for himself without anyone examining too carefully how he had spent the evening of June 14, 1966. The 1983 letter produced a phone call. The phone call produced a meeting with an assistant attorney general who was sympathetic and overworked. The meeting produced a memo. The memo was filed. By 1990, 24 years on, Truman Polk had died. The witness who had seen Thomas Polk's vehicle on the county road in June 1966, a man named Raymond Crenshaw, who had been 30 years old at the time, and who had told the deputy what he had seen, and then declined to make a formal statement because he had a wife and 4 children, and understood exactly what making that statement in Chilton County in 1966 would cost him, had also died in 1988, without ever giving a recorded account. He had told his daughter. His daughter had told her daughter. That line of oral history had held for 58 years without ever entering a document. By 2001, Arthur Cole, who had never stopped writing letters, submitted a renewed request to the Justice Department's Civil Rights Division under the Cold Case Initiative, which had been established in 1994 in part to address cases precisely like this one. The case was accepted for review. The review noted the blood evidence, the archived biological sample, and the notation about T. Polk Jr. in the original file. It noted that Thomas Polk was still living in Meridian. It recommended re-interview when resources permitted. Thomas Polk was re-interviewed in 2003. He was 63 years old. He had a lawyer present. He denied any knowledge of what had happened to Cecilia Voss. He said he had not been on the county road that evening. He was composed and careful, the way a man who has maintained a story for 37 years is composed and careful. There was no forensic evidence to confront him with. The biological sample from 1966 had been blood typed in 1966 and then stored. Nobody had gone further. The case went cold again. Arthur Cole died in 2009. He had spent 43 years on it. Vivian Voss died in 2014 at 91 years old. She had never received an answer. The stone in the Chicago cemetery still had no words below the dates. She had never found words that were true enough. The case had been cold for 57 years when, in 2023, a cold case investigator named Lieutenant Daria Hobson of the Mississippi Attorney General's Civil Rights Cold Case Unit opened the Voss file as part of a systematic re-examination of cases involving biological evidence predating the Dina era. Before we get to what the laboratory found and what happened when Hobson drove to Meridian, take a moment to like this video and subscribe. Every case on this channel comes from weeks of painstaking research, old files, archived evidence, the long work of making sure the record holds. Your support makes it possible. Tell us in the comments where in the world you are watching from. Now let's get back to Cecilia. The biological sample had been preserved in a state crime laboratory archive in Jackson since 1966. 57 years in controlled storage, transferred twice between facilities but always cataloged under the original case number. always intact. It was, in the terminology of forensic archivists, an extraordinary survivor. Blood collected from a rural road shoulder in June of 1966. Typed as Group AB negative, sealed in a glass vial, and held. Lieutenant Daria Hobson submitted the sample to a genetic genealogy laboratory in September 2023. The process works in two stages. First, the blood type, AB negative, present in fewer than 1% of the population, is used to eliminate family branches in the genealogy database that cannot carry that type. This narrows the field dramatically before the DNA analysis begins, which is why blood type, obsolete as a standalone identifier, became the key that unlocked 58 years of silence. Second, the extracted DNA profile is uploaded to a public ancestry database and matched against submitted profiles from living relatives. The same process used in dozens of cold cases since the late 2010s, but here refined by the blood type filter in a way that focused the search within weeks rather than months. On a Tuesday morning in November 2023, the genealogist working the case, a woman named Frances Alton, who had worked 47 cold cases in 12 years for law enforcement agencies across the South, found the match she had been looking for. It pointed unambiguously to a single family line. She cross-referenced it against the Voss case file. She found the notation on page 11 of the original 1966 investigation, T. Polk Jr., present in area per witness statement 614. No further action taken. She called Lieutenant Hobson at 8:40 in the morning. Hobson read the notation. She read it again. Thomas Polk was 87 years old. He was in the Laurel Gardens Nursing and Rehabilitation Center in Meridian. He had been there since 2021, following a fall that had required extended care. His health was declining. He had, according to the facility's records, no family who visited regularly. Hobson drove to Meridian on a Wednesday. She did not call ahead. She requested a meeting with the facility's administrator, explained her purpose, and was shown to Thomas Polk's room on the 3rd floor. He was sitting in a chair by the window. He looked at her badge. He looked at her face. He said, "I thought someone would come eventually." She set up the camera. She told him he had the right to have an attorney present. He said he knew that. He said he had been thinking about this for a long time and that he wanted to do it without an attorney because he was 87 years old and he intended to tell the truth and he did not need anyone to manage the truth at this stage of things. He spoke for 41 minutes. He said he had been on that road on the evening of June 14th, 1966. He said he had seen Cecilia Voss walking and had stopped the county vehicle. He said what happened next in the terms that an 87-year-old man uses when he has decided to be honest about something he spent 6 decades calling nothing. He said his father had known by the following morning and had made certain decisions about the investigation as a result. He said Raymond Crenshaw had told a deputy the truth, and his father had ensured the truth went no further. He said Cecilia's pocket notebook had been in the vehicle. He said he had kept it. He said he had not been able to destroy it because it had her name on the inside cover and her handwriting on every page, and he had not found a way to make himself treat it as something that could be destroyed. He said it was in a box in his room. He said they could have it. Lieutenant Hobson's hands, she would later say in a recorded interview, were not entirely steady when she reached into that box. The press conference held by the Mississippi Attorney General's office in January 2024 drew coverage from every major national news outlet. The video of Thomas Polk's statement was played in its entirety. The notebook was exhibited. Thomas Polk died in his room at Laurel Gardens on February 3, 2024, 23 days after the press conference, before criminal proceedings could formally begin. The Attorney General's office issued a statement noting that the documented confession, the DNA evidence, and the corroborating record constituted a complete investigative resolution, and that the case of Cecilia Voss was formally closed as a homicide perpetrated by Thomas Polk, with the knowledge and active obstruction of his father, Chilton County Sheriff Truman Polk. Both men were named. Both names were entered into the permanent public record. Neither name can be removed from what it is now attached to. The community response, in Mississippi and nationally, was not the localized disbelief of a small town confronting one of its own. It was something larger and older. The particular response of a country confronting evidence that what it had been told about a specific moment in its history was a lie, and that the lie had been maintained for 58 years by the machinery of a county sheriff's office, and the silence of a man in a chair by a window who had been waiting for someone to come. Cecilia Voss was 24 years old. She had grown up in Bronzeville listening to her father talk about the dignity of a day's work and her mother talk about the obligation that education carried. She had organized voter registration drives on the South Side before she was old enough to rent a car. She had gone to Chilton County, Mississippi in the summer of 1966 because someone had to go, and she was capable of going, and she went. She kept a pocket notebook in which she recorded every household she visited, every name, every response, every reason for hope or caution. Because she understood that the work was not just the visiting, but the documenting, that the record of who had been reached and what they had said was itself a form of organizing that would outlast any single summer. The notebook Thomas Polk had kept in a box for 58 years was opened by Lieutenant Hobson in that room in Meridian, and later entered into the investigative record and shared, with the family's permission, at the January press conference. The last entry was dated June 14, 1966. It recorded a household visit, a name, a response. It noted that the man of the house had said he wanted to register, but was afraid. Cecilia had written, in her small, precise hand, "Fear is honest. Will return." She had intended to return. She had been planning to go back to that house, to the man who was afraid, to continue the conversation. She had written it down because she wrote everything down, and because she believed, as her mother had taught her, that the record was how you kept your promises visible. She had been right. The record held, the notebook held. And 58 years later, the man who had tried to erase her from the county road and the investigation and the world discovered, in a room on a third floor in Meridian, that there are things you cannot destroy simply by keeping them in a box. Cecilia's niece, the daughter of her younger brother Walter, attended the January press conference and stood at the podium after the Attorney General had finished speaking, and she said one thing before she stepped back, that her grandmother Vivian had never written anything on the gravestone below the dates, because she had promised herself she would not write what wasn't true, and that she had died still keeping that promise, and that the family was going to go back to that cemetery in Chicago and finish the stone. They did. In March of 2024, they added 4 words below the dates. The words were, "She kept coming back." What does it mean that the blood from a county road in 1966 survived 58 years in a glass vial? That the machinery of justice failed Cecilia Voss completely, and then, through bureaucratic habit alone, preserved the one thing that could eventually set the record straight? And what do you think it cost Thomas Polk to keep that notebook, to live for 58 years in the same room, essentially, as the evidence of what he had done? Leave your thoughts in the comments. These are questions the country has been asking, in different forms, for a very long time. Justice found Cecilia Voss 58 years late, but it found her. because her handwriting was still in that notebook, and her blood was still in that vial, and the record she kept with a stub of pencil on a summer evening in Mississippi turned out to be exactly as durable as she had always believed records were. If you believe that kind of durability matters, subscribe. More cases are waiting in the description. Thank you for being here.